All right, welcome to part 3 of the flipped classroom. And in this section, we're going to focus on key concept 2.2 again, which is about political aspects of this time period. But also, we're going to be focusing on the more economic and social parts of Han society. And economic stuff generally falls under key concept 2.3. So, you might be thinking to yourself, wow, the Han have this ruling thing figured out. I'm surprised they're not ruling China today. Um, but they had some problems, some issues that they couldn't quite resolve. And we can see these things explained again in the mandate of heaven, which was discussed in the previous period. But also, these issues come up in China over and over and over again as we move through the different dynasties. So one of the issues was population growth. And the population of China, as you can see here, grew by a ton. 40 million people added, right? In basically 200 years, or a little bit more than 200 years. This can be a strength, but it's also a weakness because this led to general prosperity, but population growth outpaced food production. The population was able to grow so quickly because of new technologies like iron, the iron plows and things like that. But also, eventually, population growth outpaced food production, which led to famines, and famines lead to revolts, right? Also, it was really expensive to have the Xiongnu and these other nomadic groups always frequently trying to invade China. China got too big to control its empire effectively, and this is going to show up again and again, also with the Romans. So, because of this, they increased taxes, especially on the poorest pieces of their population. They couldn't collect taxes effectively from the rich, and this made farmers really upset, again, leading to revolts. Farmers also, since they were spending all their money on taxes, couldn't consume as many goods. When farmers couldn't pay their taxes, their land was confiscated and increasingly uh, part of the rich, right? The land owning elites. And these farmers were very resentful of this, and that again led to revolts, right? So this land distribution problem is something that comes up over and over and over in China. One emperor tried to resolve it, Wang Mang. He was a regent, which means that he was ruling for a very young emperor, but he actually took power himself like a baby. He took power himself in 9 CE. He introduced massive reforms to get rid of this land distribution problem and redistributed land to the peasants. But that did not go so well for elites. Elites were pretty mad, and they were the ones who were mainly supplying the Confucian bureaucrats. So that led to Wang Man's assassination and a couple years of some pretty harsh fighting, but eventually the Han regained control. Socially, um, the Han social structure is very similar to other empires that we've learned about. They've got the ruling classes like the Confucian bureaucrats, and the emperor and the um, the other bureaucrats, but then they've got their artisans, merchants, peasants, and slaves. The interesting thing about China is that the peasant class under the Confucian social system, which is the social structure that is generally followed, peasants are the most important, number one, um, highest ranking social class underneath these Confucian bureaucrats here. Then you're followed by artisans, then merchants, who were the lowest social class, and slaves. There weren't that many slaves in China. There were very few in comparison to places like Rome. This really spurred innovation in China because peasants didn't want to be doing all of that work. In China, they were extremely devoted to the family culturally, or the clan. The clan really provided pretty much everything for them. Not They didn't rely on the government for things like um, things like financial support, and ancestor veneration, because of that, was still a huge thing. Remember, Confucianism is more of a philosophy, as is Taoism. Um, Religion still revolved around the family and ancestor veneration. And because of this, that played into the very patriarchal nature of China. Um, this very patriarchal nature was reflected with filial piety, which decreased the role of women and also younger people to elder males. And books like The Admonitions of Women, which, if you've ever seen Mulan, is what she recites when she goes to meet the matchmaker, which really promoted the virtues of humility, obedience, subservience, and loyalty of women to men. Throughout all of this time period, jumping away from social structures, nomadic peoples of Central Asia played an important role in China. This is what the steppe looks like. It's kind of like South Dakota or North Dakota. Um, these steppe nomads had poor lands for cultivation, which led to herding. This is a yurt, portable house of the nomads. And as part of this, um, nomadic existence. They did a lot of trading with the Chinese, but also a lot of raiding of the Chinese, as we can see with the Xiongnu. They were kind of like the conduit for ideas, however, they're still very important. And last but not least, how did the Han Dynasty fall? Well, this is from chapter 12. So we haven't quite, this is an attachment to chapter 8. Han Dynasty regained control, but they were weaker. They were weaker economically because they didn't have as much control as they did before. They were suffering from diseases that had been passed along the Silk Road, so their population was fluctuating wildly. They were dealing with invasions and also famines. When farmers are dying from diseases, they can't produce food, which leads to even more famines. As part of this, the Yellow Turban Uprising challenged the land distribution policies of the Han, and they ended up controlling a huge part of China. They were actually influenced by Taoism, which is kind of interesting, and you can read more about that in your book. The government of China of the Han became really ineffective. There was a lot of corruption in the court. Later emperors never even left their palaces, so were totally out of touch with the people, and they were incredibly incompetent because of this. And eventually, the Han Dynasty collapsed because of these problems in 220 CE, and China entered another period of warring states. Thanks for listening and hanging in there until the end. Don't forget to do the listening checks that are associated with these flipped classrooms, and have a wonderful day.